"I think something's wrong at the hospital," whispered Lily Harper, her small fingers fumbling with the cracked screen of her old smartphone as the message sent itself into the unknown. The sunlight poured through the half-open blinds of her modest Brooklyn apartment, dust motes dancing like tiny golden specters in the air, and the hum of traffic outside felt like the heartbeat of a city that never paused. She had not meant to contact Michael Sterling, the towering CEO whose name was emblazoned on skyscrapers across Manhattan, whose life seemed untouchable, impervious to the worries of anyone outside his glass tower. Her heart pounded not just from fear of what she had done, but from the knowledge that a mistake could cost someone dearly. Outside her window, the streets were filled with the sounds of a late spring morning, taxi horns, a skateboard clattering on the sidewalk, the low murmur of hurried conversations, and yet inside her chest, the quiet dread of being unseen and unheard pressed down with a weight heavier than any skyscraper. Her blue dress, faded from months of hand washing, clung slightly at the seams, and the ribbon in her blonde hair had frayed edges that told the story of countless nights spent reading under dim light, seeking comfort in her great-grandfather's worn journals. She had always been taught to stay small, to blend into the corners of a world that never truly noticed her, but the urgency of what she had seen at the local hospital made invisibility impossible. Far above, in the chrome and glass tower that split the clouds, Michael Sterling leaned back in a leather chair that smelled faintly of new polish and expensive cologne, his massive office stretching 40 feet from floor to ceiling, overlooking a panorama of the city glimmering like a sea of gold under the rising sun. The air was crisp and controlled, filtered and scented to perfection, every surface reflecting the meticulousness of his life built on precision and wealth. His assistant's phone buzzed insistently, and the name on the screen made him frown, a shadow crossing the sharp features of a man accustomed to absolute control, the kind of man who measured time in contracts signed and fortunes made. He had been reviewing quarterly projections, charts showing numbers that seemed meaningless in their vastness but dictated the livelihood of thousands, when the alert came. An unusual message, sent from an unknown number, simple words typed with the trembling honesty of someone who mattered little in the eyes of the world. Lily's small voice, carried through the text, bridged a distance of 10 stories and countless layers of wealth and security, reaching him in a moment that made him pause, a flicker of curiosity breaking through his habitual indifference. Down in the narrow hallway of her apartment, Lily's hands clutched the phone as she replayed in her mind the hospital scene. The monitors blinking, the nurses rushing, the tiny cries of a baby, the name that had appeared incorrectly on the form, the feeling that something critical had been overlooked. Her blue eyes, wide and earnest, reflected a storm of fear and determination, and for the first time that morning, she dared to hope that someone would listen. Outside, the city roared and hummed, indifferent to the small drama unfolding in the corner of an apartment, but inside, the air seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the impossible connection between a child who had no power and a man who seemed to have everything. And in that waiting, the world seemed to tilt, a fragile hinge swinging between disaster and salvation, and all Lily could do was pray that her message, sent by mistake yet loaded with truth, would not be lost to the ether but reach the man who could make the difference, whose hands and choices could turn a whisper in the dark into a life saved, a small voice breaking through the silence of a gilded world that rarely noticed the smallest among them. Michael Sterling sat back in his chair, the sunlight reflecting off the polished mahogany desk, and casting a warm golden glow across the expanse of the office that stretched from floor to ceiling. The walls were lined with bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes, each spine stamped in gold, and the soft hum of the air filtration system mingled with the distant sounds of traffic far below. He ran a hand through his silver hair, feeling the tension knot in his shoulders, and let his gaze wander across the skyline, skyscrapers glittering like frozen flames under the mid-morning sun. The office smelled faintly of polished leather and cedar, a subtle reminder of wealth and control, yet for the first time that day, the weight of an unexpected message unsettled him. His assistant hovered nearby, notebook in hand, waiting for instructions, but even she sensed the unusual tension in the air. Michael tapped his fingers on the desk, the rhythm slow and deliberate, each tap punctuating his thoughts as he considered the possibilities of an urgent text from a number he did not recognize. Meanwhile, in her small Brooklyn bedroom, Lily Harper pressed herself closer to the window ledge, the hum of the city seeping through the cracked glass and mingling with the faint aroma of baked bread from the street below. Her heart raced as she imagined the man who would read her message, a figure whose life seemed as distant from hers as the stars themselves, yet who now held the power to act on the truth she had glimpsed. The blue dress she wore hung loosely, faded at the seams, a tangible emblem of the life she lived quietly in the margins, while the ribbon in her hair had frayed ends, whispering stories of long nights spent poring over her great-grandfather's journals and imagining worlds far beyond her own. In the Manhattan skyscraper, Michael picked up the phone and studied the screen, his eyes narrowing at the precise, simple words of a child who could not yet grasp the breadth of the man's power. The city below seemed to pause for a moment, the sounds of horns and footsteps fading into an almost surreal quiet as he read the message twice, each word carrying a weight he had not expected. Across town, Lily clutched the edge of the windowsill, her small fingers cold against the painted wood, and drew a slow, steadying breath, grounding herself in the awareness that she had done everything she could, that her voice might yet reach someone who could make a difference. The office, with its vast windows and the soft glint of gold accents, felt simultaneously immense and fragile, a cage of wealth and authority suspended high above the streets, yet now open to the possibility that a single unnoticed message could shift the balance. Michael's assistant shifted slightly, sensing the hesitation in the usually unflappable CEO, and Michael finally straightened, the light catching in his sharp eyes, a mixture of skepticism and curiosity battling within him. Outside, the city pulsed with life, unaware that the course of an ordinary morning was bending towards an extraordinary turn. The hum of engines and the clatter of footsteps, underscoring the delicate tension between power and the unexpected truth that had just arrived in a small trembling hand. Inside the quiet Brooklyn apartment, Lily Harper sat on the edge of her bed, her small feet dangling above the worn wooden floorboards, the afternoon sunlight filtering through a half-closed curtain and casting long, soft shadows across the room. The faint smell of laundry detergent and the faint echo of distant traffic filled the space, wrapping her in the familiar comfort of her modest surroundings. She clutched the phone tightly, the screen still glowing from the message she had sent hours ago, and traced the cracked edges of its casing with her thumb, as if the motion could steady the whirlwind in her chest. Every tick of the wall clock seemed amplified, each second stretching longer than the last, mirroring the slow and steady rise of panic and hope that intertwined within her. Across town, Michael Sterling moved from his leather chair to the floor-to-ceiling window, the city sprawling below him like a miniature world of glass and steel. He pressed a hand to the smooth surface, feeling the coolness of the glass, and let his gaze sweep over the streets, the taxis weaving like tiny threads through a tapestry of activity, the pedestrians moving with deliberate purpose unaware of the quiet storm building in a high-rise office above them. The text from the unknown number continued to weigh on him, a small persistent presence in the controlled, predictable rhythm of his day. He considered the child who must have sent it, imagining the small fingers, the bright, earnest eyes, the heart racing with the knowledge of something important, and felt a flicker of connection that his world rarely allowed. In her bedroom, Lily hugged her knees to her chest, the faded fabric of her dress brushing against her skin, and remembered the instructions from her mother. Stay invisible, be quiet, do not draw attention. Yet every instinct inside her screamed that she could not remain silent this time, that the message she had sent could make a difference, and that the invisible threads of action could suddenly weave into consequences far larger than she had ever imagined. Michael finally sat back in his chair, the cityscape reflecting in his eyes like a mosaic of possibility, and allowed himself a moment to breathe, to consider that the voice of a child could hold truth and urgency powerful enough to reach him above the hum of machinery, the shuffling of papers, the quiet authority of assistants moving with precise efficiency around him. He tapped the screen of his phone with slow deliberation, reading and rereading the simple words, allowing each phrase to settle into his consciousness, and felt the weight of responsibility press down, not as a corporate obligation, but as a moral imperative that he could not ignore. In Brooklyn, Lily pressed the phone against her cheek for a heartbeat, feeling the warmth of it, the steady glow of possibility, and let her mind wander for the briefest moment to the life of the person at the other end, imagining a world of skyscrapers and polished floors, of leather chairs and organized chaos, a world so distant yet now directly linked to her small trembling voice. The sun dipped lower, painting the apartment in warmer, golden hues, and Lily straightened, lifting her chin as if summoning courage from the fading light, her eyes fixed on the window, envisioning the man above, imagining him seeing, imagining him listening, imagining the possibility that her words, sent with a mixture of fear and hope, might be the hinge upon which a critical moment would turn, the slender thread connecting a small life to the vast machinery of a city and a world where the right decision could make all the difference. The afternoon light in Manhattan cast long reflections across the polished glass walls of Michael Sterling's office, the skyline stretching endlessly beyond, a mosaic of steel and sunlight, and he sat motionless for a moment, absorbing the weight of a child's message that had arrived unbidden into his meticulously ordered world. The room was filled with subtle sounds, the faint hum of air conditioning, the distant whistle of a passing train, the soft shuffle of papers in his assistant's hand, and yet all of it seemed to fade beneath the quiet urgency of the text before him. Michael's sharp eyes traced each word, the precision of their simplicity contrasting with the complexity of the situation it hinted at. A crisis unfolding silently in a hospital miles away, a life balanced delicately on an unnoticed thread. Down in Brooklyn, Lily Harper leaned over her small desk, her elbow propped on a stack of textbooks, the worn leather cover of her great-grandfather's journal open beside her, and her mind raced through the details of what she had seen. The hospital room, the monitors, the name that did not match, the steady, tiny pulse of a baby who depended entirely on others noticing the truth. She had never imagined her ordinary actions could intersect so profoundly with the life of a man whose existence seemed wrapped in glass and steel, a man who commanded a vast empire yet was now tethered, in this instant, to her words. In the office above the city streets, Michael reached for his coat, the leather smooth and familiar under his fingers, and allowed himself a single deep breath, feeling the tension and responsibility settle into a slow, deliberate rhythm. Each decision he made in the next moments would ripple outward, touching people whose faces he had never seen, whose names he had never known, yet who now depended on his attention and judgment. Lily, with her blonde hair catching the late afternoon sun and her small fingers still holding the phone, imagined the unknown recipient receiving her message, a man who seemed untouchable and indifferent to the concerns of a child, yet whose power and reach could change everything. She folded her hands around the phone, the warmth of it grounding her, reminding her that although she was small in stature and unseen in her daily life, her actions carried weight far beyond what she had believed possible. The apartment smelled faintly of fresh bread from a nearby bakery, the hum of life in the neighborhood carrying a steady pulse beneath her anxious heartbeat, and in that space of quiet and waiting, she felt both the fragility and the potency of her own voice. In Manhattan, Michael paused at the edge of the floor-to-ceiling window, the city sprawling below like a living puzzle, each car and pedestrian part of an intricate, interconnected system, and he imagined the child whose words had penetrated his carefully constructed world, imagining her wide, earnest eyes and the urgency in her tone, feeling an unfamiliar stir of empathy and focus that cut through his usual detachment. Outside, the wind lifted faint fragments of sound from the streets, the occasional horn, a distant siren, the rhythm of life continuing, unaware that in these moments, two very different worlds were converging. The simple truth carried in a child's message poised to reshape events, tethering innocence and experience in a fragile, yet undeniable connection that neither would forget. The golden light shifted, brushing the surfaces of the office in warm hues, and Michael, taking another slow breath, felt the steadying weight of the responsibility now resting on him, the reality that the smallest voice could command the attention of the largest presence, and that action, deliberate and careful, would be required to honor the truth that had arrived unbidden into his world. The phone on Lily Harper's worn wooden desk vibrated again, a sharp, insistent reminder that the world outside her small apartment was moving fast, and that the message she had sent had already begun its journey through the vast networks of the city. She swallowed hard, the tightness in her throat mingling with the flutter of anticipation in her chest, and lifted the device to read the latest response, her fingers brushing against the cracked leather cover as if seeking reassurance from its familiar texture. Miles away, in the steel and glass expanse of Manhattan, Michael Sterling paced slowly across the polished floors of his office, the sunlight from the afternoon casting warm, geometric patterns on the floor, the reflections bouncing off the sleek surfaces of his minimalist furnishings and painting the room with the golden hues of a late spring day. His mind raced, calculating the logistics, the responsibilities, the potential outcomes of acting on a message sent by a child whose life was so different from his own, whose world was measured in faded textbooks and small apartments rather than skyscrapers and quarterly profits. The city outside roared with life, the distant blare of taxi horns and the muted rhythm of subway trains creating a backdrop of normalcy against which this unusual urgency stood starkly. Lily, seated cross-legged on her bed, ran a hand through her fraying ribbon, her blue dress soft against her skin, and imagined the hospital scene over and over, the monitors blinking steadily, the nurses moving with quiet efficiency, the baby who depended on someone noticing a crucial error, and the realization that her tiny voice could ripple outward and touch lives she had never imagined. Michael paused at his window, the weight of decision settling over him like the last light of day falling across the city, and allowed himself a moment to breathe, to listen, to consider the message again, parsing the words, the implied urgency, the unmistakable intelligence and presence of a young mind reaching out across the chasm between worlds. In Brooklyn, Lily pressed the phone to her cheek for an instant, grounding herself with the warmth of it, and felt the tiny surge of courage that came from acting, from speaking even when invisible, from trusting that her actions, however small, could carry weight. The office smelled faintly of polished wood and citrus from a diffuser on the corner of his desk, and the sunlight caught the edges of a crystal paperweight, scattering rainbows across the floor, a subtle reminder of control and precision. Michael lifted the phone again, his thumb hovering over the screen, and for a heartbeat he imagined the girl in her modest room, the tiny apartment filled with sunlight and dust, her determination undimmed by circumstance, and he felt a rare spark of clarity, the realization that action, informed and deliberate, was needed now, that the world of skyscrapers and glossy reports would shift with the decision he made. Outside, the wind carried faint sounds from the streets below, a bicycle bell, footsteps on pavement, a street musician's soft melody, and in that moment the connection between a child and a man, between urgency and authority, between ordinary and extraordinary, felt tangible and immediate, like a thread stretching across the city, invisible yet unbreakable, ready to guide the next steps that would soon alter the course of lives far beyond this quiet room in Brooklyn and the sunlit office high. Above it, the afternoon sun dipped lower over Brooklyn, casting a warm amber glow through the cracked blinds of Lily Harper's bedroom, illuminating dust particles that drifted lazily in the air, each one catching the light like a tiny star suspended in time. She sat upright on the edge of her bed, her legs dangling above the floor, the phone pressed tightly to her chest, as if it were a lifeline connecting her to a world that usually seemed distant and unattainable. The quiet hum of the city outside was punctuated by the occasional distant siren, the clatter of a delivery truck, and the faint laughter of children playing several blocks away, sounds that usually brought comfort but now underscored the tension in her small apartment. Lily's heart raced as she remembered every detail of the hospital room, the monitors ticking steadily, the soft beeping that measured life in increments she had only just begun to understand, and the tiny pulse of the baby whose name she had seen written incorrectly on the forms. Each second that passed felt heavier than the last, and she could feel the gravity of her accidental message pressing down, the unknown outcome stretching before her like a bridge she could not yet see across. In Manhattan, Michael Sterling stood at the edge of his floor-to-ceiling windows, the late afternoon sun reflecting off the glass skyscrapers across the city, sending sparks of light into his spacious office that smelled faintly of polished leather and aged wood. He held the phone in one hand, his thumb hovering above the screen as he reread Lily's words, trying to parse the urgency, the clarity, and the courage encapsulated in each simple phrase. His mind raced, weighing possibilities, considering logistics, imagining the small room in Brooklyn, the child sitting quietly, her wide, earnest eyes reflecting concern far beyond her years. The office around him was meticulously organized, each desk, each filing cabinet, each carefully placed decorative object a testament to control and precision, yet in this moment, all of it seemed secondary to the fragile thread of communication that had reached him from an unexpected source. Outside, the city continued its steady rhythm, the horns, the footsteps, the hum of life creating a backdrop against which the extraordinary unfolded in quiet increments, invisible to the people walking their paths, oblivious to the connection forming between two disparate worlds. Lily adjusted the ribbon in her hair, worn at the edges from days of study and careful wear, and drew a slow breath, feeling both small and significant, a contradiction she had learned to carry with her. She straightened her back, lifting her chin as if to steady the invisible weight of responsibility resting upon her young shoulders, and imagined the man above the streets, the man who could act, who could make decisions that would reach the hospital room and ensure that the right outcome prevailed. Michael moved to his desk and placed the phone down briefly, staring at the city below as if willing the situation to unfold with the precision and care it demanded, the golden light catching the edges of his cufflinks and reflecting a fleeting brilliance across the polished surface of the desk. In that quiet interlude, both the child and the man felt the pull of possibility, the unspoken recognition that the smallest voice, sent with intent and care, could command attention, could reshape circumstances, and could turn the ordinary flow of a late afternoon into a moment of life-altering significance, a convergence of innocence and authority that neither would soon forget. The soft hum of the air conditioning mingled with the distant rhythm of the city, wrapping the apartment and the office in a shared, invisible space of anticipation and quiet determination, as Lily prepared herself to witness the unfolding of events that she had set in motion with a single, earnest message. The phone rang sharply on Michael Sterling's desk, breaking the heavy, contemplative silence that had settled over his office like a warm, dense fog. He straightened, the sunlight now beginning to tilt toward the western horizon, casting long, angular shadows across the polished hardwood floor and highlighting the faint shimmer of dust in the air. He picked up the phone, the weight of responsibility pressing in with every heartbeat, and listened intently as the voice on the other end relayed details he had only just begun to grasp. The hospital room, the monitors, the baby whose identity had been recorded incorrectly. Every minute of delay now transformed into urgency, and Michael felt a pulse of adrenaline ripple through him, sharpening his focus. Across the city, Lily Harper pressed her palms against the edge of the window sill, the orange glow of late afternoon bathing her small room in warmth, her wide blue eyes fixed on the street below as if she could see beyond the brick and asphalt to the skyscraper that loomed miles away, the office where the man holding her message now made decisions that could alter everything. She could hear the soft hum of her refrigerator, the faint ticking of a wall clock, and the distant rhythm of the subway, a symphony of ordinary life underscoring the extraordinary connection between her small voice and the man whose world seemed untouchable. Michael spoke carefully into the phone, his voice measured but urgent, instructing the medical staff to verify details, to act swiftly, to ensure that the baby's care was accurate and immediate, and as he spoke, he could feel the gravity of a child's insight guiding his every choice. Back in Brooklyn, Lily leaned forward, her hands trembling slightly, and watched the shadow of a bird cross her windowsill, each beat of its wings a reminder of the fragile balance between observation and action, of how a single message sent with honesty and care could ripple outward to touch lives far beyond her own. The office in Manhattan felt alive with purpose, every polished surface and gleaming object reflecting a moment of clarity and urgency that contrasted sharply with the routine predictability of the day. And Michael's mind raced through contingencies, each one anchored to the small truth that had arrived in a glowing screen from a corner of the city few would have noticed. Outside, the wind carried the faint scent of blooming trees from the avenues below, mingling with the aroma of freshly baked bread from nearby cafes. The world continuing its quiet march while inside the office and the apartment, two lives were bound together by a thread of action and awareness, invisible yet unbreakable. Lily's fingers brushed against the frayed ribbon in her hair, a symbol of countless quiet moments of study and reflection, and she drew a slow, steadying breath, feeling the potency of responsibility and courage in equal measure. Michael, still on the call, glanced at the cityscape now deepening in color with the approach of evening, the reflections off the glass buildings scattering light like liquid gold, and he recognized that the smallest voice, persistent and perceptive, had become the axis on which a critical moment would turn. The golden light and the growing shadows intertwined, creating a cinematic frame around the unfolding events, and in both Brooklyn and Manhattan, anticipation and action merged seamlessly, marking the beginning of a sequence of decisions and observations that would soon culminate in a resolution neither could yet see but both had set into motion. The evening sky over Manhattan had deepened to a rich, velvety blue, the last traces of sunlight glinting off the glass towers and reflecting across the city like scattered shards of gold. While in his office, Michael Sterling finally exhaled, the tension that had gripped him for hours slowly loosening as he confirmed the necessary actions with the hospital staff. Each instruction he gave was precise, deliberate, and infused with the clarity that only urgency could summon, and as he spoke, he imagined the small, determined figure in Brooklyn, her wide eyes and earnest expression driving the weight of his decisions. Across town, Lily Harper leaned back against the window frame, the fading light bathing her in warmth, and she allowed herself a tentative sense of relief, The knowledge that her words had reached someone who could act, who had the ability to translate her concern into real-world outcomes, and the apartment seemed to breathe with her. The gentle creak of the floorboards and the faint hum of distant traffic, a quiet applause for the courage that had carried her voice so far. Michael reviewed the details once more, ensuring the baby's identification was corrected, the medical staff fully informed, and the sequence of care secured, and in the stillness of the office, the hum of the air conditioning and the occasional whisper of his assistant moving through the space became the backdrop to a rare, human moment of clarity and accomplishment. Outside, the city was alive with lights beginning to flicker on, the glow from street lamps mingling with the soft illumination of shops and office windows, creating a tapestry of life moving on as if it had always known the extraordinary events unfolding quietly within two disparate locations. Lily, sitting cross-legged on her bed, fingers wrapped around the phone that had carried her small but crucial message, felt a surge of pride mingled with humility, understanding for the first time how an ordinary action, performed with honesty and care, could resonate far beyond the immediate moment, touching lives in ways she had never imagined. Michael, standing once more at the window, watched the city pulse with energy below, the streets alive with movement and sound, and in that vibrant panorama, he recognized the extraordinary impact of a single voice, small yet powerful, capable of shaping events and illuminating the capacity for insight, responsibility, and action that exists even in the youngest and most unlikely among us. The office glowed with the warm reflection of city lights against glass and polished wood, and Michael allowed himself a brief, reflective smile, appreciating the convergence of trust, courage, and attention that had transformed a routine afternoon into a meaningful intervention. Lily adjusted the ribbon in her hair, now catching the soft glow of the city lights, her mind replaying the hospital scene, the monitors, the careful attention required, and the profound sense of connection that her simple message had forged. In both Brooklyn and Manhattan, the ordinary and the extraordinary had intertwined, a child's courage and a man's authority creating a ripple through time and space that would be remembered quietly but indelibly, a testament to the power of observation, action, and the unexpected influence of the smallest voice. By the time night fully settled over the city, Manhattan glowed with thousands of lights that flickered like a constellation of human effort and ambition, and in his office, Michael Sterling leaned back in his chair, the faint reflection of street lamps shimmering across the floor-to-ceiling windows, his thoughts quietly circling the extraordinary events of the day. The baby's status had been confirmed, all necessary steps had been taken, and a profound sense of resolution filled the space, the polished wood and leather furnishings now seeming to radiate calm rather than the tension of earlier hours. Across town, Lily Harper sat cross-legged on her bed, the soft hum of the city beneath her like a lullaby, and allowed herself a gentle smile, her blue eyes reflecting the glow of her small desk lamp and the distant orange hue of streetlights beyond the window. Her fingers traced the edges of the phone that had carried her message, a lifeline bridging two worlds, and she marveled at the weight her simple action had carried, realizing that courage and attentiveness could have consequences far beyond expectation. The apartment smelled faintly of warm bread from the bakery below, and the lingering aroma of afternoon sunlight on wooden floors, comforting and familiar, grounding her in the moment as she reflected on the unexpected power of her voice. Michael reviewed the sequence of events one last time, noting the swift response of the hospital staff, the clarity of communication, and the delicate balance of timing that had made the difference, and he felt an unusual, quiet humility settle over him, an awareness that even in a world dominated by wealth and authority, insight and integrity could come from the smallest and most unlikely of sources. Outside, the streets hummed with evening activity, taxi cabs threading through avenues, pedestrians returning home, and the distant subway groaning as it carried passengers through underground tunnels, all part of a city that rarely paused yet had been subtly altered by the bridge between a child's vigilance and a man's decisive action. Lily's thoughts drifted to the hospital, imagining the monitors, the gentle hum of machinery, and the relief on the faces of nurses and staff, and she felt a quiet pride in knowing that her observation had mattered, that her awareness had directly shaped the well-being of someone who could not speak for themselves. In Manhattan, Michael returned to the window, gazing down at the bustling streets, the reflection of lights dancing across his face, and acknowledged internally the lesson carried by a simple, well-intentioned act. That attentiveness, responsibility, and courage are not bound by age, status, or expectation. The city around them, vast and complex, had been touched subtly by a sequence of thoughtful actions, linking Brooklyn and Manhattan in a narrative of quiet heroism, careful attention, and human connection. As the night deepened and the city's glow softened, both Lily and Michael settled into a reflective calm, aware that the smallest voice could shift outcomes, illuminate truths, and bridge divides, and that the ordinary flow of a late spring evening had been forever transformed by the courage, observation, and integrity of a single